Thanks everybody for joining this part of our DevSecOps Summit by Harness. I got a really awesome session lined up for you guys on the new AppSec Playbook, securing AI native applications. And I have two very distinguished colleagues that are joining me, Chris Peltz and Dmitry Dunavetsky. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name too bad there, Dimitri. But yeah, why don't you guys kick it off? Dimitri, do you want to go first? Kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and Dayforce, what you do there?
Well, hello everybody. My name is Dmitry Donevetsky. I run product security organization at Dayforce. Been in security for over 20 years in a number of different roles. The most latest one is focused on making sure that we deliver secure software at Dayforce to our customers. For those of you who may not be familiar with Dayforce, we are a SaaS company focused on HCM, human capital management, and payroll software. We've got about 7,000 clients and over 7 million users that we serve every day.
Awesome. Chris Peltz, why don't you tell us about yourself? What do you do at GuidePoint?
Hi, I'm Chris Peltz. I direct security strategy and architecture for our Northeast region here at GuidePoint. And I focused about the last decade of my career on these kind of find and fix areas of security, vulnerability management, application security, cloud security, those types of things. We at GuidePoint are a security-focused advisor partner. And so in my role here, I speak to organizations of all industries and sizes and kind of hear what they're doing around application security and AI, and looking forward to a great conversation today.
Awesome, good stuff. Thanks both of you guys for joining us. So we're gonna dive in. We got three areas of questions. So let's get started. The first is as organizations are building AI native applications, what are some of the architectural changes that you guys see happen, and then how do the attack surfaces change? Dimitri, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure. I think as it comes to architecture, the architecture of delivering a lot of the AI native apps is still similar to sort of a normal application that we've been delivering over internet, over the web to a lot of the users, and that still continues to be a mechanism. However, the architecture does change slightly. We've got this LLM that everybody's talking about in the back end, and there's a number of ways that applications today integrate this sort of a new large language model capabilities. There are RAG, for example, which is the augmented generation, retrieval augmented generation capability, which essentially allows you to create an ability to add some of the contextual data from your normal databases into the flow of LLM, which provides a best way to answer questions. And when it comes to security, you sort of have this convergence of the general structured data or unstructured data with the data that LLM generates for us. And so as we think about how do we secure that, we have to think about the regular attacks that usually use a lot of the structured data like JSON. You can think about SQL injections. That is sort of not necessarily a way that AI-based applications are being attacked today. And there's a lot of different papers, including OWASP Top 10 large language models, vulnerabilities and attacks that have been published. But the focus there is really on semantic meaning. And how do we determine that somebody is trying to attack our application, our AI application? And for that, we really have to understand what are the questions or content and its context that are being sent. And so there's a number of applications and vendors in the ecosystem that are building semantic aware security capabilities that are meant to be able to detect if someone is trying to do, for example, a prompt injection to retrieve data that they're not supposed to retrieve. And so this layer of this semantic meaning behind the prompts is what I see a lot of the practitioners and vendors that are trying to add within the security stack of AI applications.
Yep. Yeah, it's really interesting, Dimitri. I love that you called out kind of the data flows and how the data is, it's almost unpredictable. I'm sure many of us have used AI in our personal lives and certainly at work, right? And you think about it, how you prompt those generative AI services. Usually it's a chat interface, but like kind of the nature of prompting and what you get out of it, the prompt responses, it's very non-deterministic, right? It's like the general range, like percentages of what you'd expect the response to be. Maybe you have to do sequences of prompting, prompt chaining. So yeah, it gets really interesting. Chris, what are you kind of seeing from your lens?
Yeah, I think Dimitri did a great job of pointing out there are some fundamental differences with the architecture of these AI apps. To kind of round out some other considerations there, a lot of these applications that our business partners are developing are the product of AI driven development as well. So maybe not a classic architecture problem, but it's not just a matter of calling on AI, but using AI for development that might be a security consideration. I definitely really appreciate Dimitri calling out the semantic issues with the new attack surface. And that attack surface extends back into things like supply chain and model training, right? So there's kind of these elements of we need some sort of data provenance to make sure we're not poisoning data, or even the shared responsibility model. As we get more and more prevalent with AI technologies, I think you'll see more AI driven and AI fueled platform as a service. And so our development stakeholders might be using some quasi AI service provided by their cloud provider, and we have to shift to more of a governance and responsible usage model more than a typical testing model.
Yeah, really good points, Chris. I love that you called out like the cloud aspect of it because I think that's like a reality of working with the language models. Certainly, large language models. It's the data, like the training data specifically, or just the compute to run that model. It tends to be cloud scale, right? So I'd say most organizations are. Maybe you're hosting, maybe you're working with some small language models and running things locally, but I'd say most orgs are running things in the cloud or connecting to third-party generative AI services. So it goes back into those data flows too that Dimitri was talking about. So really interesting stuff. Guys, why don't we talk a little bit about the application security? Like how have things kind of altered, right? Are our traditional tool chains working in this new tech stack, right? It's to me, it's an evolution of cloud and APIs and things that we've been building on for the better part of a decade, 2 decades, but amplified, right? And the attack surface is shifting. So are those traditional tools working? Like, what are you guys seeing? Dimitri, do you want to start? Like, what are you seeing at Dayforce?
Yeah. I would say we definitely shouldn't be throwing away our tool set. It works in many different ways. We still want to make sure that the APIs are built securely. They provide a level of authentication, authorization that's required. The model specifically that's really serving the content in the back of our AI applications is very critical of figuring out additional tool sets that again, I'll go to that word, semantic meaning behind how we actually test our application. So what we're starting to do more and more is we're starting to add a database of prompts that we are sending to this application during the development process to see how the models react. We're also looking at diverse responses from the model, potentially to even the same set of prompts. And how do we control that? We're also building a set of middleware that is really there to be able to intercept and validate the prompts that are going to the model and be able to uncover those maliciously intended prompts that may be sent so we can determine how to block them or respond in a friendly way to a user, maybe to something that we don't want the model to answer. So, for example, in our world, in Dayforce, we deal with human capital management, HR data, payroll data. But if somebody asks, our co-pilot, our AI agent to write them a poem, we probably don't want to respond to that. The other thing I think that we also need to be concerned about is just the abuse of these applications, right? We want to make sure that the prompts that are not meant for our use cases are really filtered out. So I would say we need to augment our tool chain when it comes to securing AI applications.
Yeah, interesting, Dimitri. I love that you called out use cases too, because that's been my experience also, right? It's like very specific. Like the app design tends to be very tied to the use case, and you didn't use the word specifically, but when you say kind of the middle piece with prompts, you're referring to like AI guardrails specifically, and then you're tuning to that use
Yeah.
case. Can you
Yeah,
elaborate a little more?
there's two scenarios. One is we are sending these prompts during the development to see how model and the whole application reacts, and the second is sort of a proxy or a sidecar within the application that's responsible for proxying or validating that the prompts are safe and they are part of the use cases that the application needs to support.
Yeah, I'm curious too, Dimitri. Like, how do you like process wise? How do you kind of capture the use case, like the expectation for that entirety of the integration with the LLM and how people interface? Like, how do your teams kind of tackle that, right? Because like I think that's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's like, well, for a specific use case, like writing poetry, you wouldn't expect that from like
Yeah.
a retirement assistant interface. So like, how
Yeah,
do you
well,
kind of approach that?
that's an excellent question, Mike. And I think, so as an example, we want our AI assistant to be able to help somebody write a performance review, right? In an HR software like this. But we don't want somebody querying AI to, for example, respond to a cooking recipe. So, my advice is, be friends with your product and development teams. Understand what applications they're building. Engage early and often with those teams, so that your teams understand the needed use cases and the needed way the model should be acting, and then test for that and test for those edge cases that somebody may be launching against your model. Check for SQL injection inside the model prompt, because your team's development teams may be sending that response to a model and then extracting something that may be querying your traditional database. So you really want to augment the tools with your web application firewalls with ability to block SQL injection or other web-based attacks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting kind of thinking about again going back to the data flows, like where could all things populate and like how do you test for that, right? It's kind of behaviors and sequences of transaction. It's not so much like, hey, here's a cross-site scripting attack or a SQL injection. Although those things are relevant, right? The model could spit out malicious code and then that gets rendered somewhere else. Chris, do you want to kind of chime in here? Like, what are you seeing? Like when you advise GuidePoint customers?
Yeah, I think the introduction of AI into applications and development is starting to stress the part of organizations' AppSec practices that already were sort of lagging. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations had gotten disciplined about testing for very specific things. Like, oh, we look for static code flaws. We look for vulnerable third-party libraries. We look for hard-coded secrets. Those were kind of the parts of development and AppSec that practices were tending to get a bit more mature in. the areas where they were tending to lag were things like the overall posture management of a program, meaning how do I handle the diverse set of languages, stakeholders, workflows, even testing tools I have? How do I wrap this together as a program? And AI adds a lot more diversity. We talked about how there's different architectures for AI inclusive apps. Well, that's adding even more diversity to our development communities that already were diverse. And that tended to be an area where a lot of orgs struggled. Another area that orgs struggled with was supply chain. And AI introduces a lot of supply chain considerations. There's been documented cases of model poisoning from the sense of having malicious models in marketplaces or seeking to have malicious plugins to IDE editors, just various supply chain issues that I would say the average organization hadn't fully really come to as mature of a set of processes to combat as they had with, again, those very fine, hey, let's look for vulnerabilities in code in a static sense or something like that. And then finally, what Dimitri did a great job of unpacking is the business logic type issues that AI introduces to the behavior and exploitation of applications. We'd started to kind of come around to this idea of business logic flaws in terms of API security. And we're starting to make some gains there. And now we kind of have this explosion of scope of business logic footprint to exploit. And I think those things in the through line of these kind of three areas are they're equal parts art and science. I can't just take a testing tool and perfectly solve supply chain or perfectly solve, handling a lot of different work streams in parallel. And it's those things where you really have to bring the human element, a lot of pre-planning, a lot of collaboration. That's really where our opportunity to really rise to meet the AI security concerns. That's where our opportunity really lies, I've found in my experiences.
Maybe I
Great
could
stuff.
add just
Oh, go ahead, Dimitri.
a
Yeah.
thought to what Chris has mentioned. It's really good advice. Like know who is connecting to Hugging Face and downloading open source models.
Yep.
Know in your code base which AI services, be it in cloud provider or a local model that somebody is running within your cloud provider is using. I think visibility is critical. Once you've established that visibility where LLMs are used within your organization, then you can start figuring out what's your approach for securing them.
Yep.
And to piggyback off that, a lot of folks get paralyzed at that step because they say, I have incomplete visibility. I don't have a lot of great tools to do these things. Part of the battle is arming our partner stakeholders with this is what good looks like. So if we can quickly develop a set of sanctioned AI inclusive workflows and encourage the use of those, we can start to rein in the surface area of the kind of shadow AI usage, and then we can then from there expand our capabilities and then look for, okay, really where are my outside cases here?
Yeah, I love that you guys touched on the kind of new dependencies that arise in Hugging Face, right? Like it's the models, the data too, right? It looks different, right? You're talking about like vectors or embeddings. It might just be numerical representations of text. Like that's new to a lot of practitioners, and you're both speaking my language with kind of the API interconnects, right? The discovery piece is interesting because you ask most organizations and teams within them, like, do you have visibility into the apps? And it's like, sure, we know what we have, right? They're pulling from their asset catalog, and then it's like, or maybe network traffic flows, and it's like, okay, but does that have the context for how APIs are communicating to external services? Is it contextualized for AI? Is it invoking other AI and ML services like image recognition? How does that get changed, right? That becomes part of your business logic. So it's like the visibility and discovery is much more than just, well, here's this workload in a cloud environment or my data center, and it communicates to third party through this, network firewall. That's certainly part of it, right? Dimitri, I think you were talking about there. Like, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Those things work. We keep them for a lot of other security efforts, but with AI native, we have to kind of go deeper and get more context because like you're saying, Chris, the business logic is really the meat and potatoes of it. Yeah, great stuff. Guys, do you want to like go down the rabbit hole of agentic, right? This is kind of a lot of industry. It certainly fills my news feed when I'm scrolling or doom scrolling at night, right? What latest model did provider X release into the world? Oh, and it's agentic, right? So it can do whatever you want, right? It's kind of autonomous. Are you guys seeing that? Dimitri, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about agentic? How's it impacting Dayforce?
Yeah, that's an interesting word, right? And I think it's a very loaded word. I was driving by freeway in San Francisco downtown, and billboards were saying agentic enterprise, and I was like, what is agentic enterprise? So is that an enterprise that just runs on its own and AI is
No
doing everything?
employees, it runs itself.
Just runs itself. So I find that it's definitely a loaded term. The way that we're thinking about agentic is really allowing allowing the AI and large language models to make decisions and take on actions. And so there's a notion of agents that have sort of memory and LLM and ultimately some tools that are applied and agentic ways where we allow the model to pick the right tool for the job. And you see a number of vendors provide sort of easy to use agent building capabilities, including, for example, MCPs and how to access third party data from your LM and from your workflows. The way that we're at Dayforce trying to secure is really understand again what are those business flows that lend themselves to be more efficient when we want to add LLM or AI specific capabilities. But really thinking about, well, if a model is going to be performing certain tasks on our behalf, what sort of access can we give? How do we treat human identities versus agent-based identities? And what is that model going to look like? Because if anybody has ever looked at vectorized data, it's a bunch of numbers. So how do we know what this agent can and cannot access and ultimately serve back into the business flow? And so I think we're all trying to figure out what is that agentic enterprise will look like. How do third-party services through MCP or through other mechanisms play a role in agentic enterprise, agentic world, and ultimately how do we put a focus on identity and access and make sure that we provide just enough data and just enough access to those agentic workflows so that they can help our business to be more efficient.
Yeah, great stuff, Dimitri. Yeah, it almost speaks back to I'd say the data flow and the business logic, right? So it's like, well, how do you determine the access decision? Usually it's based on data and what it's doing with the data. So yeah, we certainly need a lot more visibility. Chris, do you want to kind of dive in? What do you see in Guide Point?
Yeah, that last point you make, Dimitri, is really the critical mass of what I see when I partner with organizations. It's that business efficiency, right? That's the big driver for agentic adoption or agentic aspiration. And it's kind of these things we traditionally would try to make self-developed internal business apps for, almost things that processes and workflows you'd almost use business automation for, seem to be the places organizations want to start, kind of unleashing agents, things where originally we would have people do it that became too expensive or inefficient or this and that, and we never quite solved for it with self-developed means, whether that's an app or something else. And so now we want to kind of throw an AI agent at the problem, and then extend that all the way through, okay, well, the development of those AI agents, we would also like to have some level of autonomy so that we can just bring a use case to a stack. It both comes up with its own technology solution and executes that. That is the end state that we see organizations aspiring to. Mm-hmm. We're far from that. And so it's really just hey, here's a very onerous business process, or even a security process. How can we parse a bunch of security telemetry down to something actionable? Those are the things we start to see folks focusing on. And the security concerns that you bring up of, I would react a little bit to what you're saying, Dimitri, with there's a certain level of opacity when you get into AI agents. And that's really where, to your point, Mike, where people get uncomfortable, because you immediately go to this kind of science fiction world of, hey, AI is doing something on its own. It could decide to do something bad, and I really won't know until it's too late. And really, as responsible, forward-looking security practitioners, the things to scrutinize up front in that world where maybe we don't have a complete understanding or visibility into these workflows is we really have to tighten up that identity layer. I really appreciated when you mentioned, human identity versus non-human identity. If we're going to have agent-to-agent communication, that's all non-human identity typically. And that's yet another area where a lot of folks have been kind of taking their time as they build out their security program. And that's an area that maybe we should accelerate some maturity because as the business wants to have agent-to-agent communication, we'll probably need to really have an up-leveled non-human identity capability and practice going, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you guys you went right for it. Right, so I'd say for some of our listeners, maybe they're not familiar with MCP, which is a Model Context Protocol. There's other formats like agent to agent, but yeah, it's I think you touched on this, Chris, kind of the evolution, right? I've kind of seen business process management and robotic process automation. These are all kind of tools that promised to help you automate all sides of your business. Like agentic seems to be an evolution of that, but delivering on the promise for sure. But at the end of the day, for us, it's kind of more technical artifacts, more APIs, and how things talk, and then acting on that kind of autonomously. I'm curious, you guys are both clearly seeing MCP use cases. Is it primarily for developing and building, or are you seeing more use cases on other aspects of security, like how you operate the environment or secure it? Is that do you have any insight on that front?
I I definitely see the MCP usage across our development community, and they're sort of early adopters. I feel like a lot of the tools that we see out there really trying to use agents and agentic is geared towards kind of that development community. We are starting to experiment with MCP more like on the support side, so that a support technician can ask a question, and the agent or the model will go out and query different support systems, sales systems, and kind of bring information back. We're experimenting with that. But again, as Chris was talking, I was thinking, we're in the security space. I've always been, or for the last 10, 15 years, I've been conditioned about SOP, standard operating procedures. Well, it's very difficult to write a standard operating procedure from an AI agent and have it perform it consistently because of those probabilistic ways that the models are tend to think or respond. And so that creates yet another interesting dilemma on how do you get predictable answers or outcomes from the agentic enterprise or agentic processes where we use LLMs and agents to perform tasks on our behalf.
Mm-hmm. And one of those is a kind of use example of you let your dog out in the backyard. You don't really know exactly what your dog's going to do. But if your yard is fenced and, you've kind of shown your dog a couple things, you know what the worst case is. It's probably going to do it at least in your yard. So that's kind of how we have to construct the guardrails for these agentic workflows. In terms of what we've been seeing organizations focusing on, I'd say probably 3/4 of the agentic development I've seen is around that building and developing side. That tends to be more at the forefront. I think when I partner with organizations and they're considering using AI on the security side, a lot of that is they're seeking to find products that are using it on their behalf. And some very popular, probably the two most popular use cases for that are taking a lot of incident or SOC data and distilling it into kind of some natural language and buttoning it up for a level 3 analyst type thing, or using agents to decide on smart testing. So we kind of talked about how we would test AI inclusive applications. Well, one thing that folks are really seeking is, if I'm going to do dynamic testing, let's have AI do a little bit of reconnaissance and hyper focus the tests so I can be more efficient, more effective, quicker tests that really drive to the heart of the problem.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. For me personally, when I got into AI, I have a young son, and at times I was kind of like, it's very much like working with young humans, and I've heard other researchers say this too, right? Because you have to train them on things, and then define what those boundaries are, the guardrails, and then it's kind of sit back and see what the result is, right? And then kind of steer them hopefully towards the better decision. But I love, Dimitri, that you kind of called out, right? Security procedures have to be pretty well established. Some might say rigid, right? Because we have regulatory obligations. So it's definitely a brave new world. You guys touched on.
I love the backyard and the dog analogy from Chris.
Yeah, that is a good one. I love that. Yeah, take it for a walk too.
Yeah.
It's take your agentic AI for a walk. What's it gonna happen? Does it bite somebody? But you both touched on human and machine identity, which to me is we could fill another half-hour session at least, if not week-long discussion. But there's kind of that world of identity and access management. In my experience, it very quickly intersects with secrets detection and secrets management, because I'd say a lot of practitioners kind of think about machine identity in terms of, well, how do I share an API key or a certificate that it could communicate? And certainly that's the case. We talk a lot about a lot of things with AI native tend to be cloud services or cloud workloads. So you're working within those constructs. Are you seeing anything evolving in that space of like, how do we actually adjust for the machine identity problem with AI, right? Because it's almost, our identity approaches are almost clumsy and don't always work. Like, they work well for humans, certainly more interactive, multi-factor authentication, like challenge the user, but a user in an agentic flow, it might be purely machine. So like, are you guys losing sleep at night thinking about this? Are you kind of exploring new solutions? I'm curious, like what you're seeing.
Chris,
I can jump in there first. Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, AI tends to kind of stress the parts of our practices that weren't really getting much love before. And that, Mike, is the perfect example, right? I think a lot of organizations had not perfectly or elegantly solved for non-human identity. So having an explosion of them is a challenge. Now, where I'm seeing some hope and some emerging capability is around at least solving the visibility part of that, enumerating these machine identities, getting them to a place where you could make a decisive action, but that action would still most likely be on you, and that would most likely involve a lot of your classic identity and IGA tools, which, predominantly many of them were designed for human identities, right? And that's the part of the program that got the most love over the years from the folks that ran those. And so at least being able to enumerate them all gives us a powerful message back to the business. Hey, here is the scale of the problem, and we need help in this way and this way. But I do consider non-human identity one of these parts of our AppSec program that's equal parts art and science. And so, okay, I can use some science to see all these identities, but I have to collaborate with probably a lot of different stakeholders in my security org for us to collectively combat the problem and get the most out of some, maybe even they may feel like legacy tools to contribute to that problem.
Great, yeah. And in my mind, and if we're just kind of zero in on how AI sort of changes the access model and data security overall, well, we're about to have tremendous amount of data be vectorized, which means the data that lives today in your traditional databases is going to be transferred from text into this vectorized definition of what that data could be or it is. And I think the challenge that's going to be in front of all of us is how do we take not the authentication component, but the authorization to that new data model and data store. And so how do we know that now this set of numbers representing somebody's unique personal record is assigned to that personal record, and only a certain process or even a person using an LLM can access. So I think that's really in my mind is how do we take the access model, the RBAC, and then modify it in a way that it's going to be applicable to the data as LLM wants to see it, and that's just pure numbers, pure vectors. I actually have not seen a very solid set of solutions that would help us to migrate the data access model to this new data store.
Yep. Yeah, it's certainly keeping me awake, Dimitri. Yeah, it's kind of and I'd say AI is very data hungry or information hungry, but more than humans, right? So it's like it gets crazy, and I'd say like security brain is kind of, oh, you would look for a behavior anomaly, like the user is going to dump the customer access list, and it's like, well, an AI might do that anyway because it needs all that. You're trying to figure out what you want. So it's the access control and authorization flows, as you said, are incredibly tricky, right? And then you think about kind of the architecture where things live, right? And then the APIs. How do you authorize just that endpoint to that piece of data? That API caller to that piece of data, and then is that in your environment? Is it in the cloud? It's a very interesting problem space, probably beyond what humans can do, right? Without AI assistants themselves, in my mind. All right, Chris, Dimitri, thank you guys so much for joining me in this conversation around the new AppSec playbook, securing AI native applications. Hopefully it gave everybody that's kind of tuned in some ideas on how the tech stack's changing, how our security approach needs to change, then what are some of those emerging processes and technology to really get ahead of AI security. So, gentlemen, thank you again. This is Mike Isbitsky, product marketing here at Harness, and thank you for attending this session at the DevOps Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having us.